Donald Trump, it's being reported, now threatening a further 50% tariff on China from April the 9th. So
the market turmoil is continuing to hit US stocks. They're down again amid the worsening trade war between the US and China.
Breaking overnight, tariffs on China could jump as high as 245%. A White House fact sheet on Wednesday says the new hike is in response to China's retaliatory tariff of 125%.
No shot was fired. But with 245% tariffs, the United States may have launched the most strategic clash of the decade. Today, we investigate how the United States' decision to impose unprecedented tariffs on China exposes internal vulnerabilities in Xi Jinping's regime, while repositioning Washington at the center of the global economic architecture. Beyond the headlines, what's at stake goes far beyond trade. We're witnessing a confrontation between production models, strategic value chains, and disputes over 21st century geo-economic influence. The tension between the United States and China has just reached a new turning point. In Chinese cities, banners with pro-democracy messages have begun to appear, visible signs of growing discontent with Xi Jinping's leadership. Meanwhile, in Washington, the response didn't come through speeches, but through a direct impact maneuver. The U.S. government announced tariffs of up to 245% on products imported from China, one of the most aggressive tariff hikes ever recorded in the history of U.S. international trade. But what prompted this tariff leap? According to sources close to the U.S. administration, it's a strategic reaction to retaliatory actions conducted by Beijing. However, behind this dispute between governments, the greatest impact is felt far from the negotiating tables, on the streets of China, where ordinary citizens face the economic collateral effects, layoffs, delayed wages, and the silent collapse of small industries. Dissatisfaction, once veiled, is now beginning to surface publicly, with protests growing in frequency and intensity. Parallel to the tariff clash, there's another silent front of conflict being waged: the control of information. According to digital security experts, automated influence networks linked to the Chinese Communist Party operate on Western platforms to amplify narratives favorable to the regime and suppress any content that directly criticizes Xi Jinping's government. This digital propaganda effort is not new, but its intensity has been increasing as internal economic strain deepens, while the battle for perception intensifies in the virtual realm. In the real world, China launches another strategic retaliation, this time with a potentially profound impact on the U.S. economy. Beijing halted the export of rare earths to the United States. As in previous cycles of response, the move was carefully calibrated, part of a multi-front strategy designed to pressure Washington without immediately triggering mechanisms for open military or diplomatic escalation. China's decision to stop sending rare earths to the United States is not merely symbolic. It's a high-precision chess move. These are among the most critical resources of the 21st century economy, essential for keeping the technological and military machinery running. But what exactly are these rare earths? They are a group of 17 elements on the periodic table, with unfamiliar names like europium, holmium, and scandium that, despite their low profile, are present in strategic technologies. Without them, you can't produce semiconductors, wind turbines, missiles, electric vehicle motors, fighter jets, or even LEDs. They are, in fact, the invisible metals that underpin the infrastructure of the future. And global dominance is largely in the hands of one country. China controls about 70% of the world's rare earth production and approximately 90% of rare earth magnets, indispensable components in electric vehicles and precision weaponry. This isn't just an industrial advantage. It's a first-order geopolitical lever. China's dominance over the rare earth market is no accident. It's the result of a deliberate long-term strategy. Back in the 1990s, Beijing recognized the potential of these minerals and adopted a clear national policy. It classified deposits as strategic reserves, imposed strict state control, and invested heavily in refining technology. Contrary to what many imagine, this monopoly didn't arise because China has exclusive geological access to rare earths. These elements are scattered across the planet, including in US and European soils. The difference lies elsewhere: the environmental cost of refining. Extracting rare earths is relatively easy, Refining them, however, generates tons of toxic radioactive waste, requiring stringent environmental controls. In the West, environmental and social regulations made the process economically unviable. In China, on the other hand, regulation was more flexible, or in some cases, absent. This allowed the country to offer a service few were willing to undertake, transforming a raw resource into a high-value industrial input. Thus, over the years, China established itself as virtually the only global player willing to bear the environmental costs of refining. The result? A monopoly not rooted in geology, but in industrial capacity and willingness, fueled by clear political decisions and economic incentives. Although China's monopoly represents a critical vulnerability, the global landscape is beginning to shift. The demand for rare earths is constant and growing, opening space for new players to enter the scene. Countries with similar mineral reserves, previously inactive in this market, are now considering relaxing environmental regulations to become alternative suppliers. The West itself, until now absent by regulatory choice, is starting to reposition. This movement took concrete form with a recent executive order signed by the U.S. government. The document establishes an official investigation into the risks associated with dependence on foreign critical minerals and derived products. More than a technical audit, it's a clear signal of strategic change. The country is preparing the ground to rebuild part of its domestic production capacity, even if it means revising environmental rules and accelerating investments in mining and refining. Experts project that this transformation won't be immediate, but is inevitable. As geopolitical pressure mounts and supply chain bottlenecks become visible, market logic prevails. Where there's demand and margin, capital flows, whether through private investments, public-private partnerships, or government incentives. The expectation is that other countries with reliable governance will begin to occupy spaces left by China, a realignment that not only alters trade flows, but reshapes the poles of industrial influence in the world. The most immediate side effect of the crisis didn't come from government offices. It came from factories. With the U.S. tariff jumping to 245%, one of the highest ever applied against any trading partner, the flow between China and the U.S. is being strangled. Chinese exporters are losing access to their largest market. Production slows, wages stop. On the industrial ground, the response is visible. Factories closing, debts piling up, and protests emerging in cities previously stable. For many workers, the trade war has ceased to be an abstract concept. It has turned into layoffs, delays, and streets occupied by silent protests. External economic tension is increasingly translating into internal social instability. In one of the boldest gestures in recent months, pro-democracy banners were hung over a bridge in Chengdu, a city monitored by one of the most sophisticated surveillance systems on the planet. The message, clear and direct: no national rejuvenation without political reform. Democracy is the way. The act reveals more than individual courage. It reveals the human cost of challenging a regime that operates under over 700 million cameras scattered across the country. In an environment where dissent is monitored in real time, every public act of resistance becomes a risky sentence. The irony is that the same city, Chengdu, is constantly promoted by foreign influencers as a symbol of the true China, a carefully choreographed showcase by the Communist Party. Videos showcasing prosperity and order are displayed on Western platforms, while the real repression remains out of frame. The author of the banners was arrested shortly after publicizing the action. According to reports, he spent a year preparing, aware he'd have only one chance. His final words echo the desire of a generation. All I want is democracy in China. Like other dissidents before him, he will likely vanish into the shadows, a reminder to the world that, behind the images of stability, there are cracks that cannot be ignored. Factory shutdowns are beginning to reshape China's urban landscape. In Nanjing, workers protested after the closure of a Volkswagen plant, active for over a decade. With no payments and broken promises, the movement exposed something larger: the silent exit of multinationals from the country. Volkswagen, for example, announced a series of closures of its industrial operations, a direct reflection of commercial pressures. But not only. The Chinese economy was already facing severe challenges in recent years: sectoral bubbles, slowing consumption, and policies that affected entire production chains. With the escalation of tariffs, the structure began to crumble. And while the government signals resilience, part of the population faces a harsh reality. For many, the official narrative of national resistance collides with the real impact of economic stagnation. In global trade, it's consumption, not production, that determines who sets the rules. A Chinese businessman, pressed by the reality of day-to-day operations, was blunt. Without access to the American market, there's no margin, no future. Despite China's population scale, its purchasing power represents only a fraction of that of the United States. With about 350 million inhabitants, Americans drive a third of all global consumption. In other words, 1 in every $3 spent on the planet comes from a U.S. consumer's pocket. The European Union, even with a larger population, doesn't offer the same dynamism. And internally, China still hasn't developed a consumer market strong enough to offset the loss of external access. More than a currency, the dollar functions as the master key to the global trade system. Being outside this ecosystem is, in practice, being isolated from the chains that sustain modern commerce. Redirecting trade to other continents may sound strategic in rhetoric, but in practice, it proves unsustainable. The businessman is direct. Regions like Africa face structural consumption limitations, and markets like India are unstable in contract enforcement. The contrast is clear. Only the United States has a solid middle-class base with immediate liquidity. That's why, even under political tension, sovereign funds, pensions, and international capital continue to flow to the U.S. market. Capital follows where there's predictability and purchasing power. In the businessman's view, the dilemma is mathematical. 70% of Chinese manufacturing depends on exports, and 80% of international reserves come from trade. Losing access to the American market is tantamount to cutting off the very source of sustenance, not just for the state, but for the productive base and families. Instead of ideological slogans, the argument is one of survival. Negotiating isn't weakness, it's calculation. A rigid stance may please the official narrative, but it doesn't feed factories or keep jobs. In moments of pressure, yielding isn't capitulation, it's preserving stability. Beijing continues to respond with symbolic and economic measures. The latest, a formal ban on Chinese airlines purchasing Boeing jets. The decision blocks the entry of at least 10,737 MAX aircraft, escalating tensions between the two countries. As an immediate consequence, Boeing's shares fell 4.6% in pre-market trading, according to Bloomberg data. To make the purchase unviable, the Chinese government also imposed a 125% tariff on U.S. goods, doubling costs and rendering contracts unfeasible. It's a direct but carefully calibrated retaliation. It affects large corporations, pressures the aviation sector, and creates noise in the markets. In the narrative field, control intensifies. While protests spread among industrial workers, state media avoids reporting on internal economic effects. Instead, fake videos circulate, like a supposed panic in American supermarkets to buy Chinese products. The footage, however, is from a 2018 Black Friday. While distorting external signals, the regime works to block content that unmasks its own propaganda. It's a game of image and silence. And while official cameras film stability, the streets tell another story. That of a strained economy and a population increasingly unwilling to ignore the signs of wear. Faced with this impasse, the real question isn't who wins, but who can withstand the pressure longer. Are we witnessing a strategic reconfiguration or just another chapter of interdependence disguised as confrontation? Share your take in the comments, because interpreting the game is the first step to understanding who really controls it.